Sometimes it might be subtle, sometimes direct, and even sometimes it might be blatantly obvious. But changing attitudes can be a result of intentional choice or persuasion tactics. And whether it's a politician trying to win your vote or a friend trying to convince you to try a new restaurant, persuasion's all around us. And guess what? There's not just one way to do it. So, when was the last time you could recall someone or some group trying to persuade you of something? So, we define persuasion as the act of trying to change someone's attitude. And it's an important part of our everyday lives, and we're constantly bombarded with persuasion attempts from advertisers, friends, family, and so on. Say, for instance, you're trying to persuade your friend to watch a new movie. You could talk about the movie's positive reviews, the director's previous work, and the strong performances of the cast. Or you go a different route and you tell your friend that the movie's funny, exciting, and has a good soundtrack. And these methods speak to the different routes of persuasion a person can use. Now, which route of persuasion you choose will depend on your friend's interests and how much attention they're paying to your conversation. So, in this case, which would be the most effective? Well, it still depends. So, let's look at the different ways messages can influence our attitudes. The elaboration likelihood model, known as ELM, proposes two primary routes to persuasion: the central route and the peripheral route. And marketers and advertisers rely on these techniques to convince us to change our attitudes and thus our behavior. Now, the central route involves persuasion through careful and thoughtful consideration of the information presented in the message. And this route is effective when the audience is motivated and able to process the information. It's often used for high involvement products or issues where people are more likely to invest time and effort in making a decision. So think about a detailed advertisement for a new car, highlighting its features, benefits, and safety ratings. This type of ad aims to persuade through the central route, appealing to the audience's logic and reasoning. For instance, many anti-vaping PSAs use the central route of persuasion, and this type of persuasion relies on logic and evidence to convince viewers that vaping is harmful. So let's take a few seconds and check out this clip.
You think vaping isn't dangerous, but your body knows the truth. Disobeyvape.com.
And these type of ads typically focus on things like the health risk of vaping, such as nicotine addiction, lung damage, and increased risk of cancer. Of course, the addictive nature of nicotine and how vaping can lead to lifelong addiction. And naturally, the fact that vaping is marketed to young people and that it can lead to a gateway to other forms of tobacco use is indicated. Now, on the other hand, there's the peripheral route of persuasion, which involves persuasion through superficial cues and associations, such as the attractiveness of a speaker or the emotional appeal of the message. And this route is effective when the audience is not motivated or able to process the information deeply. It's often used for low involvement products or issues where people are less likely to engage in extensive decision making. Imagine a commercial for a soft drink featuring a catchy music or vibrant colors and celebrity endorsements. And so this ad relies on peripheral route, aiming to create positive associations and emotional connections with the product. And this is a really popular method to sell stuff. For instance, how many of you all have heard the phrase sex sells? Well, that is also true. And this Aston Martin marketing team used the peripheral persuasion attempt in this ad to promote their product. So in this case, using the woman's sex appeal and implied previous sexual behaviors, and talk about misogyny, gross, right? They use these as peripheral cues by saying things like Aston Martin's newest advertisement for pre-owned cars. We see that it's referring to, you know, you're not the first, but do you really care? So As the peripheral cues, this ad's trying to create a positive association between pre-owned Ashton Martin and the woman in the viewer's mind. This ad's also trying to evoke emotions such as excitement, desire, and envy by making a statement like that. And so peripheral persuasion can be an effective way to influence people's decision-making process. But it's important to note that it's not based on logic or evidence. No factual information or serious information regarding the quality of the product has been provided in this case. And this means that it's more likely to lead to short-term changes in behavior rather than long-term changes. Another examples of peripheral routes of persuasion include things like catchy jingles, attractive actors or actresses, humor, and those superficial ploys. And so advertisers use these peripheral routes of persuasion because they're easy to produce and can be effective, even when people are not paying attention. And again, which route of persuasion is more effective? Well, the answer is that it depends on the situation. So if you're trying to persuade someone about a topic that they care about, it's best to use a central route of persuasion. However, if you're trying to persuade someone about a topic that they do not care about, you can use a peripheral route of persuasion. And in order to achieve success in persuasion, it's not just about using the central or peripheral routes. There are other pivotal factors that also play a crucial role, such as the source of the message, the content, the intended audience, and so on. These elements are interconnected and have a pivotal impact on the outcome of the persuasion attempt. So, what influence do persuasion sources have on the effectiveness of a message regarding attitude change? Well, a significant amount, actually. For instance, people are more likely to be persuaded by messages that come from sources that they are perceiving as credible. A key element that contributes to the credibility of a source is their expertise. And this is perceived as authority in the relevant field or subject matter and implies that the source possesses knowledge, skills, and experience related to the topic. For example, a person is more likely to be persuaded by a message about health risk of smoking that comes from a doctor than from, for instance, a celebrity who smokes. Familiarity can also be a powerful source of persuasion, as people tend to be more comfortable with and receptive to things or ideas and individuals that they're familiar with. When something's familiar, it's perceived as less risky and thus more trustworthy. And this is why the mere exposure effect is relied upon, as people tend to develop a preference for things they have been exposed to repeatedly. And research shows that simply being exposed to something or someone multiple times can increase liking and acceptance. In marketing and advertising, this principle is often used to make products and brands more familiar to consumers through repeated exposure in ads. And the source's identity, values, and beliefs should be similar or aligned to those with the audience. And when individuals feel a sense of similarity with the communicator or source, they are more likely to trust, identify with, and be influenced by that source. And finally, as shallow and sometimes disgusting, like that Ashton Martin ad, it seems attractiveness can play a significant role in influencing attitudes and behaviors. And this can be physical attractiveness, but it can also include other qualities such as charisma and confidence. People are more likely to be persuaded by individuals or sources they find physically, socially, or emotionally appealing. In addition to the content of a persuasion message, the way it's presented and frequency also impacts its success. Comprehensibility of a persuasion message is crucial for its effectiveness, as the message must be clear, understandable, and easy to process for the audience to grasp and to be persuaded by it, essentially. And this includes elements such as clarity of language, logical structure, simplicity, relevance, consistency, delivery, and so on. Quantity of a persuasion message refers to the amount of information or content included in the message. For instance, of the message that if the message does not have an adequate amount of arguments and sufficient evidence to support its claims, it would be ineffective. Another element to consider is the length of the message to avoid overloading and overwhelming the audience. When people are bombarded with excessive details or arguments, they may have difficulty processing and retaining information, which can reduce the message's persuasiveness. And maybe even more than quantity, the quality of the persuasion message is critical in determining its effectiveness. A high quality message is more likely to persuade the audience and achieve the desired outcome. This includes factors such as making clear and concise arguments, using well supported evidence and data, relevance of the message, and purpose, such as a compelling call to action. For instance, when we consider notable figures who have strong and effective messages, a number of people could come to mind. You might think of inspirational speeches by former President Barack Obama that relied on emotional appeal, shared goals, inclusivity, and strategic messaging to promote social change. Or even the passionate Greta Thunberg, who always uses a direct and urgent tone. She's empathetic yet firm, and while using clear and impactful language when discussing the challenges of climate crisis. And these individuals' presentation styles are always complementary to the topic of discussion. They consistently repeat their message in different ways to enhance the receptibility of it. However, persuasive messages do not always have to be positive to be effective. Unethical and immoral leaders can indeed be effective in delivering persuasive messages as well. For instance, Adolf Hitler, as a leader of Nazi Germany, employed hate speech and scapegoating to incite prejudice against Jewish people, ultimately leading to the Holocaust in World War II. Similarly, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin used extensive propaganda and censorship to maintain control over the Soviet Union. His regime promoted a personality cult around him while suppressing dissent and criticism. And an effective speaker needs to know their audience. And this is because the speaker needs to tailor their message to the audience's interests, their needs, and level of understanding. This sort of audience analysis involves identifying the audience and adapting a message to their interests, level of understanding, attitudes, and beliefs. So we'll discuss some factors that contribute to the quality of persuasion messages. Retention refers to the ability of the audience to remember and recall key messages. The information that's presented or arguments presented in the persuasion message after exposure. So, high retention is crucial for persuasion because if the audience does not remember the message, it's unlikely to influence their attitudes or behaviors in the long term. Factors that promote long term retention include repetition, simplicity, use of visual aids, and emotional impact. Attention refers to the degree of focus and concentration that the audience directs towards a persuasion message while being exposed to it. So, to be effective, a persuasive message must capture and maintain the audience's attention. If the audience does not pay attention to the message, it's unlikely to have an impact. So, audience attention can be affected by the use of emotional appeal, novelty, and relevance of the subject, and the amount of visual and auditory stimulation. And of course, knowledge and interest refer to the level of understanding and insight the audience has on a topic in contrast to the effectiveness of the message. A high quality persuasive message is tailored to the specific knowledge level and interest of the target audience. It acknowledges the audience's existing knowledge and seeks to build upon it. So, messages that provide valuable information or insights aligned with the audience's interests can be highly persuasive. And this information should be accurate, credible, and well presented. But persuasion isn't a one size fits all magic trick. It depends on a lot of factors. And persuaders have a whole toolbox of techniques to influence them. Excuse me, to influence. They might start with a small request to get their foot in the door, or they might hit you with a large request first and then back down to seem more reasonable. They might even try to lowball you by hiding the true cost until you've already committed. And who can resist the allure of scarcity? There's so many limited time offers, right? So be sure to take a few minutes and watch this Science of Persuasion video that highlights Cialdini's findings. All right, so as we wrap section 3, we've covered a lot about persuasion and the art of changing attitudes. Of course, persuasion is the deliberate effort to shift someone's stance on something. The elaboration likelihood model gives us the framework for understanding how this happens. It says there are two main paths, the central and the peripheral routes, where the central route uses logic and solid evidence and works best when you're dealing with an audience that really cares about the issue, while the peripheral route relies on things like who's doing the persuading, how they look, and whether the message makes people feel good. And this works better when the topic isn't a big deal for the audience. But it's not just about the message itself. Who's delivering it matters a lot as well. Are they believable? Do they know their stuff? Do we feel we know them or that we like them or we're even like them? And let's be honest, being attractive doesn't hurt either. The message itself needs to be clear and easy to get. More arguments can be convincing, but only if they're good ones. And then there's the audience. Can they even remember what you said? Were they paying attention in the first place? If they already know a lot about the topic, or if they're just not interested, it's going to be harder to change their minds. And finally, we looked at some classic persuasion tactics, such as getting your foot in the door, starting big, then backing off, making things seem scarce, and hiding real costs until later. And understanding these factors can make us better at persuading others, but it also helps us to recognize when others are trying to persuade us, which we will discuss in section 4.